12-year-old Emma Johnson walked slowly into the music room at Riverside Elementary School. Her old sneakers made soft sounds on the floor as she found a seat in the back row. The room smelled like wood polish and sheet music. Emma watched quietly as her classmates chatted excitedly about getting their instruments for the new music program. Mrs. Williams, the kind music teacher, stood at the front of the room with a big smile. She had grey hair tied back in a neat bun and wore a colourful scarf round her neck. One by one, she called students to collect their instruments from the table. Emma watched as her classmates received shiny violins, sparkling flutes, and polished clarinets. Each instrument looked brand new and perfect. Sarah Mitchell, Mrs. Williams, called out cheerfully. Sarah skipped forward and received a beautiful violin that gleamed under the classroom lights. Thomas Brown, she continued. Thomas got a trumpet that shined like gold. Emma's stomach began to feel nervous as she watched student after student walk away with perfect instruments. The pile of instruments on the table grew smaller and smaller. Emma noticed that all the good instruments were disappearing quickly. She started to worry about what would be left for her. She knew her family did not have much money, and her mother worked very hard at different jobs just to pay for their small apartment and food. Emma Johnson, Mrs. Williams, finally called. Emma's heart began to beat faster as she stood up slowly. Her legs felt shaky as she walked to the front of the classroom. All the other students had already received their instruments and were examining them happily. Mrs. Williams looked at Emma with sad eyes. "I'm sorry, Emma," she said in a gentle voice. "This is the only violin we have left." She picked up an old, damaged violin from behind the table. The instrument looked like it had been through many difficult times. Emma stared at the violin as Mrs. Williams placed it carefully in her small hands. The wooden body had a long, deep crack that ran from the top almost to the bottom. The crack looked like a lightning bolt froze, and in the wood, the strings hung loose and twisted, and some of them looked ready to break completely. The bow was warped and had several missing hairs. "Look at Emma's violin," Lucy whispered loudly from the front row. Soon other students began to notice Emma's instrument. "It looks like someone dropped it down the stairs," giggled Michael. "Maybe it got hit by a car," added Jessica with a mean laugh. Emma felt her cheeks turn red with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear or run out of the room. Some children pointed at her violin and whispered to their friends. Emma could hear words like broken, ugly, and worthless. She held the damaged instrument close to her chest, trying to protect it from their stares. "That's enough, class," Mrs. Williams said firmly. "Every instrument has its own story and its own sound. Emma, I know you'll take good care of that violin." But Emma could see the worry in her teacher's eyes too. The rest of the music class passed slowly, while other students played simple songs on their perfect instruments. Emma sat quietly holding her broken violin. She was afraid to even try playing it because she knew it would sound terrible. The crack in the wood seemed to stare at her like a sad eye. When school ended, Emma walked home alone through the quiet streets. She carried the violin case carefully. Even though she felt embarrassed about what was inside, her apartment building was old and had peeling paint on the walls. Emma climbed 3 flights of stairs to reach her small home. The apartment was empty when Emma arrived. Her mother would not be home from her first job for another 2 hours, and then she would leave for her second job at the hospital. Emma sat on her bed in her tiny bedroom and opened the violin case again. The broken violin looked even sadder in the dim light of her room. Emma touched the crack in the wood very gently with her finger. The wood felt rough and splintered. She wondered how many other students had played this violin before her. Had they all been disappointed too? Emma thought about her classmates with their shiny, perfect instruments. She imagined them going home to big houses where they could practice in music rooms. She pictured their parents listening proudly as they played beautiful songs. But as Emma looked at the damaged violin, something strange happened. She began to feel sorry for it instead of feeling sorry for herself. This old instrument had been forgotten and ignored, just like Emma sometimes felt at school. Maybe it needed someone to care for it, someone who understood what it felt like to be different. Emma made a quiet promise to the broken violin. She would try her best to make it sing again, even if it seemed impossible. Emma woke up every morning with hope in her heart. But by the end of each day, that hope felt smaller and smaller. For 3 long weeks, she had been trying to make music with her broken violin, and every single day brought new problems and disappointments. The first problem was the strings. They were old and weak, and they snapped without warning. Emma would be practicing quietly in her bedroom when suddenly a string would break with a sharp twang sound. Each time it happened, Emma felt like crying. Her mother could not afford to buy new strings very often, so Emma had to be very careful with the ones she had. When Emma did manage to play without breaking a string, the sound that came from her violin was nothing like music. It was hollow and scratchy, like an old door creaking open. She pressed her fingers hard against the warped neck of the violin, trying to make clear notes like she had seen other students do, but the wood was bent and uneven, and her fingers hurt from pressing so hard. During music class, Emma sat in the back row and watched her classmates with growing sadness. Sarah's violin sang sweet, clear notes that filled the room with beautiful sound. Thomas had switched to violin too, and his instrument produced rich, warm tones. Even the students who had just started playing sounded better than Emma ever did. Emma tried to practice along with the class, but her violin made such terrible sounds that Mrs. Williams would gently ask her to just listen instead. Sometimes watching and listening is just as important as playing, Mrs. Williams would say kindly, but Emma knew the teacher was just trying to be nice. The other students were not as kind as Mrs. Williams. Lucy had started calling Emma's violin the trash violin and would wrinkle her nose whenever Emma opened her case. "Here comes the garbage music," Michael would whisper when Emma took out her instrument. Soon, other students joined in with mean comments. "Why don't you just quit, Emma?" asked Jessica one day. "That violin sounds like a dying cat." Some students laughed, and Emma felt her face turn red with shame. She wanted to disappear into the floor. The worst nickname came from David, who called Emma's violin the wounded bird. He would make fake crying sounds whenever Emma tried to play, pretending that her violin was a hurt animal. Other students thought this was funny and started making the same sounds. Emma's heart broke a little more each day. She would sit in her small bedroom after school, holding the damaged violin, and wonder why everything had to be so difficult. Other students went home to practice on their perfect instruments, probably making beautiful music that their families loved to hear. Every night, Emma thought about giving up. She imagined walking into music class and telling Mrs. Williams that she could not do it anymore. She pictured herself returning the broken violin and sitting quietly in the back row, just watching while everyone else played. Sometimes this seemed like the easier choice, but something always stopped her from quitting. When Emma walked home from school each day, she passed the small garden where Mrs. Thompson spent her afternoons. Mrs. Thompson was an elderly woman with white hair and kind eyes who lived in the apartment next to Emma's building. She always seemed to be watering her flowers or pulling weeds when Emma came home. "How's that violin coming along, dear?" Mrs. Thompson would ask with a warm smile. Her voice was gentle and interested, not like the teasing voices at school. Emma would usually just shrug and say it was hard, but Mrs. Thompson always nodded as if she understood perfectly. One afternoon, when Emma was feeling particularly sad after a difficult day at school, Mrs. Thompson invited her to sit on the small bench in her garden. "I used to be a music teacher," Mrs. Thompson said softly. "I taught violin to children for 40 years before I retired." Emma looked up with surprise. She had never known this about her neighbor. "Really?" she asked. Mrs. Thompson nodded and smiled. "I taught hundreds of students, and I learned something important over all those years. Music isn't really in the instrument, Emma. It's in the heart of the person who plays it. The most beautiful music I ever heard came from students who had to work the hardest for it." These words touched something deep inside Emma's heart. Mrs. Thompson understood what it felt like to struggle with music. She had seen other students face difficult challenges, and she believed that Emma could overcome hers too. That evening, Emma sat in her bedroom with renewed determination. Her violin was still broken, and the other children still laughed at her, but she decided to keep trying. She would practice every day after school, no matter how hard it was. Somewhere inside this damaged instrument, Emma believed there was music waiting to be found. It was a quiet Thursday evening in late October, and Emma sat alone in her small bedroom. Her mother had left for her second job at the hospital, and the apartment felt peaceful and still. Emma had been practicing with her broken violin for over a month now, and she was tired of fighting with it every single day. She picked up the damaged instrument and looked at it carefully in the soft lamplight. The long crack in the wood seemed to glow like a river running through a valley. For weeks, Emma had been trying to make her violin sound exactly like the perfect instruments her classmates played. She had been pressing harder, pulling the bow faster, and getting more frustrated each time. But tonight, something felt different. Emma was exhausted from trying so hard, and she decided to try something new. Instead of fighting against the violin's problems, maybe she could work with them. She held the instrument gently and drew the bow across the strings very slowly and softly. The sound that came out was unlike anything Emma had ever heard before. It was not the bright, clear tone of a perfect violin. Instead, it was deeper and more mysterious. The crack in the wood seemed to add a special quality to the sound. Like a whisper or a gentle breeze, Emma's eyes grew wide with excitement. She tried playing the same note again, even more softly this time. The damaged strings created a beautiful, haunting sound that seemed to float in the air. It was as if the violin was telling her a secret that only she could understand. Night after night, Emma experimented with her discovery. She learned that when she held the bow at a special angle, the violin would sing in a way that no perfect instrument could. The warped neck, which had always caused problems, actually helped create unique sounds when Emma learned how to work with it instead of against it. Emma discovered that she could make the violin whisper by playing very gently near the crack in the wood. She found that the loose strings, when played carefully, created a trembling effect that was incredibly beautiful. Each flaw in the violin became a new way to make music. The crack that everyone at school laughed at became Emma's favorite part of the violin. When she played notes near the crack, the sound had a raw, honest quality that seemed to come straight from the heart. It was not polished or perfect, but it was real and moving in a way that touched something deep inside anyone who heard it. Emma began to understand that her violin was not broken at all. It was just different, and that difference made it special. While other violins sounded pretty and clean, her violin had character and soul. It told stories of struggle and survival, of being damaged but not defeated. Every evening, Emma practiced her new techniques. She learned to play with the violin's imperfections instead of trying to hide them. She discovered that the most beautiful music came when she embraced what made her instrument unique rather than wishing it was like all the others. Mrs. Thompson, who lived in the apartment next door, began to notice the change in Emma's playing. The thin walls between their apartments meant that she could hear Emma practicing every night. At first, Mrs. Thompson had felt sad listening to Emma struggle with the difficult instrument. But recently, the sounds coming through the wall had become incredibly beautiful. One evening, Mrs. Thompson was sitting in her kitchen having tea when she heard Emma playing. The music was so moving and emotional that tears began to flow down her cheeks. She had taught music for 40 years and had heard thousands of students play, but she had never heard anything quite like this. Mrs. Thompson could not ignore what she was hearing. She walked to Emma's apartment and knocked gently on the door. When Emma opened it, still holding her violin, Mrs. Thompson's eyes were filled with tears. "Child," Mrs. Thompson said softly, her voice shaking with emotion, "I've never heard anything so beautiful in all my years of teaching music." She looked at Emma with wonder and respect. "What you're doing with that violin is pure magic." Emma felt her heart fill with joy. For the first time since she had received the damaged instrument, someone understood what she was creating. Mrs. Thompson could hear the beauty in the broken violin's voice, just as Emma had learned to hear it. That night, Emma realized something important about life. Sometimes the things that seem like our biggest problems can become our greatest gifts. Her violin had taught her patience as she learned to work with its difficulties. It had taught her creativity as she found new ways to make music. Most importantly, it had taught her that beauty could come from the most unexpected places. Emma understood now that perfect was not always better. Sometimes, being different was more beautiful than being the same as everyone else. The day of the school's winter concert arrived on a cold December evening. Emma had been practicing her special techniques for weeks, and she felt both excited and terrified. She stood backstage in the small area behind the auditorium curtain, holding her patched violin case close to her chest through the curtain. Emma could hear the sounds of parents and families finding their seats. The auditorium was filling up with people, and Emma's stomach felt like it was full of dancing butterflies. She had never performed in front of so many people before. One by one, her classmates performed their pieces. Emma listened as Sarah played, a perfect version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on her shiny violin. The audience clapped politely. Thomas followed with a simple folk song that sounded clean and precise. More students performed, each playing their pieces exactly as they had learned them in class. Mrs. Williams appeared beside Emma with a gentle smile. "Are you ready, dear?" she asked softly. Emma nodded, even though her hands were shaking. She opened her violin case and carefully lifted out her damaged instrument. Under the backstage lights, the crack in the wood seemed to glow like a golden river. "Remember," Mrs. Williams whispered, "just play from your heart. That's all that matters." Emma heard her name being announced to the audience. Her legs felt weak and wobbly as she walked slowly onto the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience clearly, but she could sense that the large room was completely full of people. As Emma reached the center of the stage, she heard whispers from the audience. She knew people were looking at her old, cracked violin and wondering why such a damaged instrument was being used in the concert. Some parents leaned forward in their seats, squinting to get a better look at the strange violin. Emma saw her classmates sitting in the front row with their families. Lucy was there with her parents, and Emma noticed her pointing at the violin and whispering something to her mother. Michael was there too, and he had a smirk on his face as if he expected Emma to fail. For a moment, Emma wanted to run away. She felt like everyone was staring at her and judging her before she had even played a single note. Her hands began to shake even more, and she almost dropped her bow. But then Emma remembered all the quiet evenings in her small bedroom, learning to work with her violin's imperfections. She thought about Mrs. Thompson's kind words and the tears in her eyes when she heard Emma's music. She remembered how the crack in the wood had become her favorite part of the violin, and how the damaged strings could create the most beautiful whispers. Emma took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She raised her violin to her shoulder and positioned the bow gently against the strings. The auditorium became completely quiet as everyone waited to hear what would happen. Emma drew the bow across the strings very slowly and softly. Just as she had learned to do, the first note that filled the room was unlike anything anyone had ever heard before. It was not the bright, clear sound of a perfect violin. Instead, it was deep and mysterious, with a haunting quality that seemed to reach into everyone's hearts. The audience stopped whispering immediately. Even the youngest children in the room became perfectly still. Emma's music had captured everyone's attention in a way that no perfect violin ever could. Emma continued to play, using all the special techniques she had discovered. She made the violin whisper near the crack in the wood, creating sounds that seemed to float through the air like magic. She used the damaged strings to create a trembling effect that was incredibly moving. Every flaw in the violin became a tool for making beautiful music. The song Emma played was simple, but the way she played it was extraordinary. Her music told a story without words, a story of struggle and hope, of finding beauty in broken things, and of never giving up on dreams. The cracked violin sang with a voice that was honest and raw, touching something deep in everyone who heard it. As Emma played, she noticed that the audience had become completely absorbed in her music. Parents who had been checking their phones were now listening with their full attention. Children who had been fidgeting were sitting perfectly still. Even her classmates in the front row were staring at her with amazement instead of mockery. Emma felt a warm feeling growing in her chest. For the first time since she had received the broken violin, she felt truly proud of what she could do. She was not just playing music, she was sharing the story of her journey, her struggles and her discoveries. The end.